Hello, welcome to another edition of Capital Area Chats. I'm your host, Paul Brogan, and we're about all things in the greater Concord region, the people, the places, and the things that make this an amazing place to live, to work, and to play. I'm thrilled with my guests today. They've both been on the show before, but individually, and today they're here as a team. And I think we're going to have an amazing conversation with them. Barbara Higgins is, well, she could be Miss Concord, because I don't think there's a person in Concord who doesn't know Barbara Higgins, who doesn't admire, respect, or have an opinion of Barbara Higgins.
There it is.
And I've known Barbara a long time, and I'm the better person for knowing her, because she's one of the most frank and honest people I've ever met. She tells it like it is. She doesn't mince words, and yet she's also compassionate, loving, caring, supportive, encouraging. And I think that wraps up the show.
Yes.
Barbara,
Thank you.
today you're here in a new role.
I am.
You have written a book with help from our other guest, who I'll introduce in a moment. But I've had the privilege, I will say in honesty, of reading the manuscript. You sent it to me. I cried, I laughed, I screamed at the computer at places. It brought up so much emotion and passion and feeling. And it's a story that everyone, you don't have to have gone through what you went through to walk away from this book as a better, stronger, more understanding person, because every one of us deals with travails, not necessarily what you have, but in other ways. And the way that you handle it, and you're not afraid to be angry and upset and to show real emotion and not sugarcoat things. And that's what Motherland, how it spoke to me. And before we talk, I do want to introduce my other guest, who is one of my 5 favorite authors in Concord.
Thank you.
And my mother's too, because my mother read The Children's Secret, which came out about 2 years ago, I believe. And absolutely, at 99, absorbed every bit of the book, talked about it afterwards, passed it on to other people. And it's just a wonderful, again, book that speaks to people and creates characters that are real and endearing and frustrating and everything else. I mean, you ran the gamut in the people that book. Yeah. And you've written a number of other books. And I do want to say that you worked closely with Barbara on taking her words and her story and using your immense skill as an author to bring it all together while retaining Barbara's voice very loud and clear. Anyone that knows Barbara can hear her saying the lines as you read the book. It's as though Barbara's sitting there in front of you, sharing the story while you're having a glass of wine and a fire in the fireplace and all of that. But to be able to do that, Virginia Macgregor is a remarkable talent. And I just applaud you for what you have brought to her story.
Thank you.
There. Now, I've left everyone speechless, but I will. Barbara, how long have you wanted to tell your story?
I think I've wanted to tell parts of it from the very moment Molly died, and actually while all of it was going on. In the moment of things like this, when you're in such a traumatic situation, all you can do is process it. I just knew that what was happening couldn't just disappear. However, grief being what it is, I spent a couple of years in a very dark place, barely functioning, really. Just if I could get up and make it through a day and land back in bed at night, I was doing well. And as I went along, and the process went along in terms of how do you reinvent a life without your child, the desire to share the story grew and grew. It's public knowledge, because it's been in the newspaper, that we had a legal action with some physicians and hospitals that were involved in Molly's care the last weeks and hours of her life. And that was a very, very stressful process. And I remember, as that was sort of coming to an end, saying that I wanted to write a book about my experiences and just being told that I ought not to do that. So if anyone knows me, whatever you tell me not to do is exactly what I'm going to do.
That's the motivation to
Yes,
do it.
yes. And so I was doing some work at the time with a spiritual mentor named Karen Kenny. She's another local person. She used to do the yoga show with Karen right here in this studio.
Ah.
And she's an amazing human being, and she suffered the loss of her mother when she was 12.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's a very similar traumatic loss. And we were doing some spiritual mentoring work right around the time I was going through the brain tumor situation. We had settled, the legal process was done, and it's like, now what? And so the now what really was, it's time to tell my story. But I knew from the beginning I don't have the discipline, the self-discipline. Give me a job and tell me where to be and what to do, and I'll do it. To create my own schedule and set all that up and all that internal organization, it's just not something I saw that I could do. And in my work with Karen Kenny, one of the things she taught was, if you can't do something that you need done or want to do, you find someone that can. You know, like that's, you hire somebody, or you enlist the support, whatever you need. So that was sort of floating around in my head. But Virginia and I, you know, the universe does what it does, and so we know one another because, well, I tell her that the reason she and her family came here in 2016 was not for a private school job for Hugh. No, it was not. It was to meet me. I've decided that this is why they came. And so, you know, time being what it is, right around the time I was sort of thinking this would be a good thing, the Macgregors were making a sort of a career shift, and we're looking to just become a part of the Concord community. And so I have connections, and so I reached out and said, hey, you know, I've been stalking you on Facebook. I've read a couple of your books. I will interject very quickly here. And this is why she talks like me when she writes my words. I read, so a couple of her books have child loss in them. There are characters that lose a child. In my first response, and Gracie had that response when she read As Far as the Stars, she writes as if it's happened to her. And my first thought was, this woman must have lost a child, because she couldn't write like this. Like, she couldn't be inside the heart and the mind and the soul of the father or the mother who's lost the child and not have been there herself. And she hasn't. And so, you know, but it drew me to her. And so we got close, and then COVID came, and of course, so during COVID, that little Macgregor clan would come to my house and swim in the pool, and we'd hang out. And we just got chatting one day, and I said, well, I have an idea, if you'd be willing to do this, and maybe it could provide some stability for your family, but would you consider writing my story? Which was like a 5-minute conversation on the porch, and the next time she came, she had pens and a notebook. And so it began, but I really, truly believe that
There was a reason.
it was all about me.
Absolutely.
It was not about Hugh. I love you, Hugh. But it's one of those things when you meet somebody and you just look at the universe.
You know,
like, okay, yeah.
you know instantly that
Yes.
that's right. And,
Exactly.
And, and the way that Virginia writes, I mean, in all of her books, it's so, there's a personal nature to it, and an ability to make you believe and to really care about the characters. And I think that this, it's just amazing. I mean, the work that has come from this, I think truly is going to be award-winning, and I think it's going to have a huge audience because it speaks to all of us in so many ways.
Right.
And I love the fact that, again, the honesty, that's what really gets me in a book of this nature. You can tell when it's honest, or you can tell when people are glossing over or just not really delving into the raw human emotions.
Well, and I have to give a shout out. Virginia did all of it. I mean, I told the story.
Yes.
You know, narrated and dictated and answered questions and answered emails, and we talked and talked and talked. I did all of that. She listened, and then she created.
She created.
And we have this amazing publishing company, and I'll give a little shout out to them because they're called Atmosphere Press, and they're out of Austin, Texas. But never once were we told, you shouldn't say it this way, or take. We were encouraged to edit quite a bit out, and legally we had to edit quite a bit out. But it was they were unbelievably supportive in allowing us to keep the wording. That the story is the story, and how can we maintain the integrity of the story in a way that will flow and the readers. And so I don't ever feel once that we were told you can't say it this way or you can't say it that way. One of the biggest shout outs to Virginia is I sent the book to you.
Yes.
And one of Paul's first comments to me was I could hear your voice in every word. And I'm
Yes.
like, well, by the
Yes.
way, Virginia wrote this book.
Uh-huh.
And so that, but that's huge to me because anyone, you know, I've read it out loud to Kenny and Gracie's read it and they say the same thing. You didn't write this? Like, this sounds
Yes.
exactly like you. And I think it's why her characters in all of her novels are so believable because I absolutely believe that any person that's reading a book who identifies with a character in one of her books will think that Virginia's been that person because
Yes.
the authenticity of the
Yeah.
emotions and thoughts and feelings of the characters, it's pretty astounding.
It's a gift.
Yeah.
It truly is
Yeah.
a gift. Virginia, now is this the first time that you've ever done this type of a book?
Absolutely. I didn't go out looking to be a ghostwriter, to
Yes.
you know, to write someone else's memoir. You know, I was very happy writing my own fiction, and I think what drew me to it was the story and Barb's character and her voice. And one of the things I find, I was so passionate about conveying her voice on the page because I think Barb is this magnetic, beguiling person, and her spoken voice is remarkable. She is a natural storyteller. She is hugely articulate. She is very smart. And even my small children, you know, when they're with her, they just look at her wide-eyed and they listen because she just tells great stories. And so she has that part. I think it's just, you know, I'm someone who can be very happy spending a whole day in a little corner of a coffee shop at my computer screen writing. The difference is Barb is like running a marathon and going to a party and doing, like, her day is like full of things,
Boundless
right?
energy
So
she has.
too much doing in her life to be able to sit for 8 hours on her own in a secluded place, which is actually necessary for the writer. So I think what was lovely was that we brought together kind of my skills, which was the ability, you know, I'm more of a kind of a watcher and a listener than a kind of out in the wild big doer person, and Barb is more of the doer, but she also is a great storyteller. So I wanted to be able to capture her voice on the page in that kind of magnetic, authentic way. And so it's a real gift that that came across because that really, really mattered to me. And I think one of the ways in which we worked helped that, which is that I recorded her speaking a lot. So we used a special app where I would ask like a zillion questions and Barb would answer them, and then I would go for walks, and then I would transcribe, and I would try to get, you know, the rhythms of her voice, her vocabulary, her way of seeing the world, which is unique. And also what you've said in the introduction about Barb is that she's very authentic and she's very, very truthful. And I think the whole area of child loss in particular is often kind of masked in quite a bit of secrecy and subterfuge and reticence because it's really hard. I mean, I wrote this book having 3 very small children, and when I'd write a chapter, I'd go and kind of hug them in bed and kind of squeeze them tight, and, you know, it's the last thing in the world that anyone wants to think about, right, is losing a child. There is nothing harder, I don't think. But that means that people who do lose children end up feeling very isolated and very alone because no one knows how to talk about it, no one knows how to engage with it. People feel they have to be secret. People who are grieving feel that they have to protect the feelings of those who aren't grieving by not talking about it, which is completely the wrong way around. So I think what I felt really strongly about writing this book was it needed to make people who have gone through grief and those of us who, you know, who haven't, to see that it's really important to talk about this, you know, that we will all be touched at some point in some way, hopefully not as horrifically as the loss of a child, but it's Barb's voice is deeply healing. It was to me, and I think it will be to any, you know, mother, parent, human who reads it, whether they've lost a child or not. And so I wanted to capture the authenticity of Barb, who is so well known. My 9-year-old is always like, is Barb famous? And I'm like, yeah, she's famous.
Yes.
But she has that quality, right? And
She does.
So we wanted to capture that sort of, you know, that status. And then also the book is dedicated to sort of grieving mothers or, you know, grieving families anywhere. And to feel like, gosh, someone understands, someone sees, someone has the courage to sort of not also wrap it up or to deify people who are grieving, because sometimes it's messy and it's ugly and it's hard. So it was such an adventure for me. It was such a learning curve in understanding grief, understanding the art of memoir, which I'd never written before, which is different from fiction, most notably because memoir can sometimes be more fantastical than fiction. So I'd sit down with Barb and she'd say things like, you know, Virginia, there's this other story I need to tell you. And I said, but no, because if I was writing fiction, my editor would say, that's not credible.
Yeah.
You can't include
Yeah.
that. But of course, it's Barb, so it is credible.
Yes.
So it was a joy and a pleasure, and it was at times
And was it
hard.
very emotional too? Were
It
there
was, I
times
think
that
particularly being a mum, you know, but also it was a gift because I talk very openly with my children about most things and about my writing, and you know, we would take them up to the cemetery, we would go to the kind of land, Molly's birthday and the day she died, and so I think children as well are often kept away from any conversations about death and grief.
So true.
And I think from the beginning, one of the things Barb did was that she sort of gave a gift to those around her in processing her loss of Molly. So even when she was in hospital with Molly that last week, when she could have said, let's shut the doors, I want her to myself, I want to lie on this bed next to my daughter
didn't.
and have her to myself before the life supports switched off, she didn't. She invited the world in.
Yes.
Everyone came in. The school janitor came in, the bus driver came in, the teachers came in, the students came in, the dance teachers came in, you know, because she wanted them to see what this process was like, and
Exactly.
what a gift. And that's, the story is really an extension of that spirit that Barb has, which is let's open this up, let's talk about what it means to be human, because it's healing to everybody. So it was just a wonderful gift to be part of Barb's process.
And that part is one of the most emotional. I went through half a box of Kleenex. I mean, I truly, it's beautiful too, because it says so much about people also, and their capacity to love, to care, and to be touched by a child, their beauty and their joy. And it's absolutely beautiful and unforgettable, and you come away from that.
We underestimate children sometimes.
Yes. Oh,
and,
yes.
And I feel, you know, Virginia's children are a classic example of this. Children are open. They haven't been told that anything is off limits.
Right.
So what adults
Exactly.
can cringe at or want to silence,
Yes.
children just accept as it is, and then draw their own conclusions by it. And death is the same way. It's a logical, you know, you
It's
run
going
over
to
a
happen
squirrel,
to
the
all
squirrel's
of
now
us.
dead.
Yes.
This you know, we see it all the time.
Yes.
I had a childhood experience where my best friend died, and I didn't even know she was sick. Months and months she disappeared. It was in the book.
Yes.
And that stayed with me. That stayed with me for a long time. And the part of it was that I just was left out. Like, she was my best friend. Why was I not
Right.
a part
Included
of that?
or
And I just
yes.
didn't understand. I mean, I have a much better understanding now. And, you know, that was 1973 when, you know.
50 years ago, it was totally different.
Yes, exactly.
People thought they were
Right.
protecting a
Correct,
child.
right, and it was private and everything. And
Yes.
my mom, you know, worked at the hospital and knew all about it and
Yes.
couldn't say anything to me. Looking back now, that must have been incredibly difficult. But I remember that last week. I think it was a trigger from my own memory. I don't feel like I was doing it. I was doing it for 10-year-old Barb. You know, like I didn't want all of Molly's friends to just say goodbye to her on Friday and then she never comes back.
Exactly.
And that
Exactly.
reality. And for a
Yes.
long time, still to this day, I'll have parents of, you know, those kids are now 20, say that was the best thing that you could have done. And here's how it manifested in all these different ways. So, you know, if you know, I just think sometimes we keep things quiet because it's more comfortable. Coach Ludi, quite honestly,
Yes.
he lost a child. He had a 4-year-old daughter who died of a brain tumor.
Yes.
And when he came to see me, he came all the way to that hospital, and he just took my hands and said, you cry all night and you work all day. And you don't share it. And that was, you might not like to hear it, but that's what we did. Well, okay, that was the 1950s, a much longer time ago. But you know, and that was how they did it. But I will tell you, I don't know that that was necessarily the healthiest for anyone in that
No,
family. You know,
no.
and
No.
he still remembered succinctly. I had him tell me the story. He remembered every minute, from finding out how sick she was to putting her in the ground. And that, you know, he was in his early 90s when he shared all that with me. So, you know, we remember these things, and quite honestly, that was an amazing week. Molly was on life support and was never coming home, but some of those experiences were amazing. I'm lucky, and that sounds backwards, but
No.
it was.
And there are so many parts of the book that, you know, the book is about grief, but I think one of the most magical parts of that week that I took away as a mother is that Barb said she almost got to know her daughter again and parts of her daughter that she'd never known.
Right.
So as
Through
a
all
mother,
of
you
these people.
assume that because you've given birth to this child and because you know every mole on, you know, whether every mole is in their skin,
Yes.
and because you see them every day, that you have this kind of exclusive knowledge of them. But they have their secret lives, you know, they are their autonomous beings. And so, you know, a janitor would come and tell Barb, hey, Molly was the only kid who, when she came into school, would help me hang up all the, you know, the coats that had fallen off the hooks. Or, you know, Molly was the one who came and set up a lunch club for the kids who really struggled in the canteen, which was really alienating for them. And, you know, and I just find that so beautiful and so magical, and it's so helpful for me to remember when I look at my children who are slowly growing up and going to school and becoming these autonomous beings that, you know, as a parent, gosh, it's kind of a paradox, but you sometimes only get a glimmer of your children, and kind of respecting that space that they occupy in the world that goes beyond what you see sometimes, and how incredible that Molly's passing led to Barb's sort of deeper knowledge of her that she might never have known otherwise.
Which I think a lot of people will come away from that,
Yeah.
looking at their own children in a renewed or different way.
Yeah.
And that's very, very powerful. I mean, it truly, and your anger, you show in there that it's okay to be angry and mad and to express that, and not to keep those things inside, but to let it out. And
We misrepresent anger in every area of society. We're taught,
too.
you know, little Jack at home, when he gets mad, he throws things. And so, of course, your immediate thing is to stop, don't be mad, and stop throwing things. And actually, what we try to say is, obviously, you're very angry. If you want to throw things, let's go outside. And we'll go outside and throw things. You know, you're not going to break a window. But why can't he feel angry? If he's feeling it, let's process the anger through. I took a David Kessler grief educators class, and he's a person that lost a mother as a child and then lost a child as a father. You know, like, and we talked about anger, and he was reading a medical file of parents came to the hospital, found out their child was dead. The mother was sobbing. The father is evidencing inappropriate levels of anger in the hall. So what level of anger when you've just found out your child is dead is inappropriate? Right?
Exactly.
And we had a long conversation about this. And I was incredibly angry. I will say my anger was very supported. You know, we were at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and that staff and faculty and doctors and nurses and social workers and everybody, whatever you needed was just
there.
Oh my gosh, really, really well done. But right, the anger is the piece, you know, people expect you to be sad and all that, and the anger makes people uncomfortable.
Yes.
You know,
Oh, it does.
people, when's Barb going to come back? Well, until Molly comes back,
Exactly.
Barb's not coming back.
Right.
Because that Barb can't exist, because that Barb had an alive daughter named Molly. So this is Barb now. And I think sometimes that's hard. People, in the biggest of hearts, in the kindest of ways, people want me to be okay. And I have to wear that like a blanket, because that's the intention. What people don't understand is that's an impossible task. So I'm failing at one more thing. I failed at keeping my daughter alive, and now I'm failing at handling her death. It feels like a failure, and no one means that. That's just the reality of it from my side. So when I look at the book, and when I read the book, and when I think of I call them my angel mums, the hundreds of women I know, that's a small number, that have lost children, and how differently we all process it. The one thing we share is that isolating feeling of I'm just failing in one more way. And anger is a piece of that. And again, Virginia's not an angry person. You know, angry vibes don't come out of Virginia Macgregor. I can be pretty intimidating, and I have that loud voice, and I can put my school teacher.
Well, you're
face on.
sometimes bigger than life.
Yeah, well, there it is.
Yes.
So, you know, I think sometimes that's hard on people.
Yes.
But anger is no less necessary or unhealthy than any other emotion. You just don't want to use it.
true.
And the physical manifestation of anger. So quite often what would happen is Barb would tell me a story, and then I'd go away and I'd research it a little bit. I would look at, so she talks in the book about this screaming tree. So in the middle of the night when she couldn't sleep and the grief was just unbearable, she would get in a car and she would drive and she would go to this particular tree and she would just scream at it as a sort of way of kind of cathartic letting go. And then I thought it's so interesting, you know, that we have this need to, because we can have the anger, but then we feel like we don't have the right to express it or have appropriate ways to express it. And what I did in my research is I found out that there are cultures around the world, and there are also examples in the animal world where screaming or its equivalent, a sort of vocalization or a physical manifestation of anger in some way, of release, is completely appropriate and deeply healing. And so I think as human beings, we've kind of civilized ourselves into so much repression and so much good behavior that we don't allow ourselves that. And so these insights that Barb gave and allowed herself to do physically, like with the screaming trick, I think again was really healing. And understanding the children do that innately, right? They're mad. They
have a temper tantrum. How lucky are they?
Yes.
Throw themselves down in the middle of a grocery store and scream.
Yeah.
I would love to do that.
We are just about out of time. I can't believe. When is the book coming out?
So we don't have an exact publication date, but we've just wrapped up the very, very final edit. So we know exactly how each page is going to look in the book. We've got the cover, which is beautiful. We've got the endorsements, all the rest of it. And so we're hoping it will come out in September, October.
Okay,
but
wonderful.
we will keep you posted.
Look for Motherland, living with child loss and becoming a mother again at 57. It is a remarkable, amazing story. Barb Higgins is a remarkable, amazing woman, friend, treasure, important part of my life. And Virginia Macgregor captures it brilliantly with her talent, her skill, and all of her abilities. So I may have to have you back again because this is raced by so quickly, but thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you out there in television land. Thank you, Matt and Emmett, Concord TV, all of the people that email or watch the shows on YouTube and comment or stop me in Market Basket and say, I like that show. I really appreciate it as we're in our 5th season. So thank you again on behalf of Capital Area Chats. I'm your host, Paul Brogan. See you soon.